Welcome to the Geek Soup podcast, a twice-weekly show where we talk about all things pop culture to tickle your nerd bone. No matter where you're coming from, no matter who you are or who or what you identify as long as you don't identify as a serial killer or Lord Voldemort, you are welcome here. This is a safe space for you. Welcome to the soup. Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. I apologize for the lack of episodes last week. It was a big birthday for me recently, and I just recently dragged myself out of the ether of that birthday. So it's fitting that we're talking horror movies today. I love horror movies, whether it's an Eli Roth special, a horror movie like Jurassic Park, though I don't totally agree that Jurassic Park movies are horror. Campy horror, psychological horror, or something B-roll that's available on Prime. I love them. I know that people are divided on horror movies, and then there's so many genres within the horror genre that horror fans can be gore lovers but hate psychological horror, and vice versa, and then so much more. But I'm up for anything when it comes to horror. I'll start by saying that I hated horror movies growing up. I was afraid of everything. I was so scared of the dark and the unknown, and even the children's book, The Paper Bag Princess by Robert Munsch, scared me because of the dragon. I was that kid. I was terrified of everything. I worried about everything. I had and still have these vivid night terrors that are all-consuming. You know those lucid type dreams where you can actually, feel things? I mean, I've had lucid dreams where I've made out with Chris Evans, and let me tell you, they felt so real. I felt like I have actually made out with Captain America. I mean, not literally, but you know what I mean. Unfortunately, for me, my nightmares were like this too. I have these recurring nightmares of black-eyed children standing at either the foot of my bed or beside me when I'm sleeping. And it's frightening. I won't lie. It's fucking scary. When I was a kid, I had this recurring waking dream that I had a vampire living under my bed. So I was plagued with fright during my waking hours too, not to mention that I worried about everything. The funny thing is, I never really talked to anybody about it. I mean, it was largely dismissed as an overactive imagination, and in hindsight, it really should have been a warning to my family about just how dramatic I could be, or the stories I would write, or my future career as a writer and creator, but at the time, it was traumatic for me. I have terrors where I will wake up with this blood-curdling scream. It's so loud that we have to warn our neighbors whenever we move. I mean, it's a good way to meet our neighbors on the plus side, but then having to explain exactly why, and especially as an adult being like, okay, if you hear blood-curdling screaming, I'm A, not being murdered, B, he's not, going after me, and 3, we are not having crazy sex because we close our windows for that. But anyway, they are insane blood-curdling screams, and thankfully my husband he's used to them now, and I did warn him, okay? I did warn him before we got together. So being afraid of the dark and the unknown, I know now at least, was due to my control freak tendencies. I really have a hard time not being in control. I mean, hence why I love The Sims. But I also realized that this fear stemmed from a deep lack of confidence in myself. My self-esteem it's never been high, and I still struggle with self-love. But one day a while back, I had this idea to embrace that fear instead of run from it. As we all know, running from it only gives it more strength and validity. It took a while for sure, but it worked. And now I think I can call myself a true horror fan because I actually pay attention and not just peeking through holes in woolen blankets, that kind of thing. So before I dive into the episode, let's take a super quick only good news break to kind of temper the mood a little bit. This is Only Good News on the Geek Soup podcast. So recently I was out shopping and I stumbled across a toy store, and to be honest, I only went in because I saw this really cool Star Wars toy I wanted, But on my way over to check it out, I saw this National Geographic rock tumbler, and I had to get it. I'm a sucker for crystals and easy science, so I bought it. And it is so cool. I am in love with this thing. It's really loud, but it's really, really cool. And it comes with a set of rocks that you can tumble right away, but you can use it to tumble river rocks as well and just see what's underneath. And what it does is it actually simulates what a river or a creek or whatever does to these rocks over thousands of years, and it just breaks that down into a couple of days. And it's so cool. I mean, it's with the rocks that you get with the tumbler, you know what you're going to get in terms of the crystals, but it's just really cool to look at what kind of crystals you'll get from river rocks. I'm going to bet it's going to be a lot of quartz, but I'll keep you guys updated for when I do river rocks in it. I love it, and I'm currently in the midst of tumbling a set of rocks right now. I am tumbling them in my office, so I have it off, but they have different stages. So you tumble the rocks first, and then you can polish them and all of that too. But I'm just really excited to see what comes out. I'm pumped. It is really loud, and that's why I had to unplug it to record since it's in my office, like I said. I recommend putting it on top of folded clothes or something or somewhere to dampen the sound because it is, have I mentioned that it's loud? It sounds like a washing machine just from anywhere in the house. It's always like you're doing a load of clothes, but I think it's totally worth it. It's a great way to get kind of sciencey, and science, and this is easy science, is always good news. Okay, back to my horrific journey. Okay, that was kind of lame. Anyways, I know that it sounds strange that I utilized horror movies to help overcome my fear of the dark and the unknown. It's like an oxymoron of sorts, but it's life without whimsy, I guess, right? First thing I did was analyze the fear. Buddhism and many other spiritual lifestyles and religions advise truly feeling the emotion in its entirety. Then you analyze it, you acknowledge it, and then you let it go. And this is, of course, much easier said than done, but like most things, it takes practice. And contrary to popular belief, I don't know if practice ever truly makes perfect, because I don't know if anything is ever really perfect. I think that's truly the beauty of it all, and I'm not trying to perfect my ability to not be constantly fearful. A little fear every now and then is healthy, and it keeps you on your toes and aware. But it doesn't have to completely consume us either. And this was the key: how to face this fear head on and not allow it to overcome me. So I just decided to overcome it. It's only when we give it that power that it has that power over us. And horror movies are a great outlet for giving that fear power if you let them. I used to, and now I use them as an outlet to give me power over my fears. I know that probably sounds a little confusing, and it certainly warrants explanation, but that's what we have the next 20 minutes or so together for. So let's take ghosts, for example. When I was a kid, ghosts were my biggest fear. Probably because I thought I saw things everywhere, people everywhere, weird shit everywhere, out of the corner of my eye, in my dreams, or even sometimes right in front of me. These apparitions truly seemed to haunt me, and they were terrifying. Sometimes they would just look like normal people. Sometimes it was the black-eyed children. Sometimes it was a guy with his head caved in. I could not control them, and I was so scared that they would hurt me. Realizing this, though, just simply realizing it was my first step towards taking my power back. But, of course, it wasn't my last step. Even though I realized that my fear stemmed from a lack of control and not the actual idea of ghosts, I didn't just jump right in and start watching ghost-heavy movies when I'm like, oh, this is what my fear stems from, and I've realized this and now I'm cured. No. The next thing I did was inform myself. I looked into ghost stories, both good and bad. I researched what many, and when I say many, I mean many different religions think about ghosts and what they suggest doing to interact and then also to avoid ghosts. I looked into the psychology of ghosts and both sides of the do ghosts exist argument. I had some parameters around this as well, obviously. For one, I took notes. And I know that sounds funny and, well, geeky in the spirit of this podcast, but it helped me go back through these notes and my own conclusions within them. I'm totally a margin note writer whenever I needed to. Secondly, and this is probably the most important one, I made sure that I didn't do this research at night. That would have just been setting myself up for failure 100%. And then third, and I don't know, maybe this is actually the most important one, I shared. And obviously I have a podcast, so I'm a bit of an oversharer anyway. But this time I did it anonymously, of course, which I guess I'm kind of doing right now, although I do use my real name, so whatever. I shared on several different ghost forums, and so this was before Reddit, and it was basically just Reddit, but early Reddit. I don't know the name of it, and I should have got it for this. I'm going to have to pull it up because I think my stories are still on there. And I listened to podcasts when podcasts became a thing, to other people's stories, whether it was on YouTube, there was radio shows. There was a plethora. There's always a plethora of other people's stories out there. And now we have Reddit. So there you go. This comforted me to no end, knowing that I wasn't alone in my fear. And I found that the more open I was, the less I was afraid. I had closed myself off so much before because of this fear, but then closing myself off like that, it really only exacerbated it. It was only when I opened myself up, I found more outlets, more tools, more coping, and more strength that I truly, truly needed. I find that this approach has worked for me in many facets of my life. You know, there are certain things that I don't like, and I won't go into them since they're a little controversial, and I don't want the conversation to go to that because this isn't what this podcast is about. When I come to them from an open, informed, understanding, self-reflective point of view, I'm much more able to have amicable conversations and even inner dialogue about them without my anxiety or my anger or my emotions flaring and then completely shut down, and I'm not better for it, and there's no point to the conversation anymore, right? So I think that my all-inclusive lesson was that my perception is only one side of the story. And this works in so many areas of my life, but I learned all of this from horror movies, and not all of it completely from horror movies, but a good chunk was stemmed from horror movies and learning to love horror movies. Now, sometimes my perception is spot on, especially when it comes to horror movies with just utterly shameless gore. Hi, Eli Roth. I'm looking at you. I was reading this article by a doctor named Mark Griffiths. That's hard to say. It's called Why Do We Like Watching Scary Films? And it's available online. And it actually brought up some really good points about why many people enjoy watching scary movies, even though movies with excessive gore or psychological torture can actually be really disturbing. And the overarching answer? You guessed it, control. I've spoken about how my power came from really taking back control of my fear and realizing that my fear was due to lack of control. And in his paper, Dr. Griffiths quotes a 1999 study about disgust. Really, that was what the study was about. It was a bunch of researchers researching disgust, and I think that's honestly pretty cool. So in this study, participants were shown different gory clips, and I won't describe what they are. You can learn more if you do look up the paper, but they are pretty gross, and in this context, it honestly might churn your stomach. Even just reading about it kind of made me feel a little bit nauseous. They were all equally gory and presented in a more documentary type style, and the study found that 90% of the participants turned the videos off before they finished. But the study found that these same participants would attend horror movies where similarly gory shit was going down without second thought. They would easily pay for theater admission to see these gory movies. And when asked why they found the documentary type images more disturbing than basically the same imagery in horror movies, most people answered, of course, that they knew the horror movies weren't real. So it's more, quote, psychologically distanced for them. And that makes sense, right? That psychological distance is the control. And then I quote, the fictional nature of horror films affords viewers a sense of control by placing psychological distance between them and the violent acts they have witnessed. In fact, there is evidence that young viewers who perceive greater realism in horror films are negatively affected by their exposure to horror films than viewers who perceive the film as unreal. And the credit to that quote goes to Hoekstra, Harris, and Helmick. I think that also speaks to the psychology of video games. I can sit down and play Call of Duty and enjoy it, even though some of the kills are gory as fuck. But I can't watch war documentaries without hiding beneath covers or bawling my eyes out. And that was even before my husband joined the military. And before it was more personal. Now I can't even just do it. After reading that, though, I was a little confused. But for me, I knew that the movies weren't real, but I was still traumatized. And even after I was like, okay, I'm not going to let this traumatize me anymore. I'm not going to let this fear control me anymore. And I did my research and everything else. There was something else that I was experiencing and the word was just on the tip of my tongue. And as I was doing this research, I was like, oh yeah, okay, I know it, but there's just something is missing. I can't put a word to it. And then further in this article, I found it. And Dr. Griffiths quotes Dr. Deirdre Johnson, who published an article in the 1995 edition of Human Communication Research, that there are 4 reasons why people like watching horror movies. Out of these 4 reasons, which aren't as simple to explain as they seem, I found the word that I had been missing, and that was empathy. I have always been an empath. Almost to a fault. I feel others' pain and pains in emotional, physical, mental, psychological, however they are in pain, I will subconsciously take it on. For example, when I was a kid, and I might have been about 5 years old, I heard about this bus that went off a cliff, and there were a bunch of kids in it, and they drowned. And when they found the bus, they found that some kids had bloodied fingertips that were just worn down to the bone because they were trying so desperately to open the windows and escape. And after hearing that story, I was bereft. I felt like I couldn't breathe, and I just cried so much for these kids. It weighed so heavy on my heart for weeks. I remember it so much, and I know I was so young, and it really had an effect on me. And I can just see the imagery from this news story or whatever it was with these bloody children's handprints on this bus. And it was scary how close I felt with them. And even still, when I watch horror movies or, God, any movie where somebody gets hurt or somebody's head gets cut off, I find that I will subconsciously place my hand on my neck. And I don't realize that I'm doing it until I kind of zone back in and then realize that my hand is on my neck and I'm rubbing my neck as if it's sore. And that is the connection for me. Even though I knew that what I was watching on these horror movies weren't real, my empathy was running rampant. And that, coupled with my control-freak tendencies, was a recipe for disaster when watching something scary or a thriller or something really, really intense. And being informed and open was a great way to still be empathetic because there is nothing wrong with having high empathy. There is nothing wrong with that whatsoever until, at least in my case, it turns into crippling anxiety. But not allowing it to completely take over is the key, I think. Knowing this, and then of course doing and having done my own personal work on my control issues and anxiety and all my other host of issues that I have, and quite honestly, just my life experience have been great ways to help set up that psychological distance so that I can look upon the film differently as more of a story, as more as somebody telling me a story that I can kind of remove myself from in that empathetic point of view. And there are tons of different theories on why people love horror movies. I have read a couple of them even prior to researching this podcast. And these are the ones in the articles that have really stood out for me. These were the ones that just clicked the most with me. Even the famous Dr. Carl Jung thought that horror films, and I quote, tapped into primordial archetypes buried deep within our collective subconscious, Images like shadow and mother play an important role in the horror genre, end quote. Which is, of course, what how do you say that? Darren Aronofsky? Aronofsky? You know that horror film Mother with Jennifer Lawrence? That's exactly what he did with that very aptly titled movie. And there are ancient theories, and when I say ancient, I mean that Dr. Griffiths argues that these theories can date all the way back to the age of Aristotle, that posit that when we watch these scary films, we are doing it as a way to, quote, purge negative emotions and or as a way to relieve pent-up aggression. And then the argument is also proposed as a reason some people love to play violent video games, end quote, which is kind of like what I had said before about Call of Duty. And I have to agree, and these were, like I said, the theories that really resonated the most with me. When I was planning this podcast too, I was asking myself why I liked scary movies so much. And aside from what I've talked about before, that's really all I could come up with. And then the question, why do we like being scared, is another head scratcher. And of course, you can only answer from a personal, individual point of view, although I think that these theories give some important and meaningful insight into this. So let's segue quickly into what I gave a fuck about today. Since this is something that is really pertinent to what we've been talking about, and it's super cool. So as I mentioned, I have crazy dreams and night terrors, and I also have a husband who snores like a howitzer and denies that he does. So this really kills two birds with one stone. This is not a paid promotion at all. This is a totally organic recommendation. The app is called Sleep Booster, and the icon is a black background with a white circle, and they have both paid and free plans. And I paid because you just get more out of it, and I think it was maybe like 60 Canadian dollars for the year. So it has a sleep routine. You do guided breathing, guided meditation, and it has some calming sounds, and then it records your sleep. And whoo boy, some of the recordings of me are kind of insane. Like, kind of insane. There was this one, most of the recordings actually, it's me, and it's so funny because I know what my voice sounds like, obviously, I edit my own podcast, but listening to these recordings, I sound like I'm drunk. Like I can hear the actual words coming, the words, like when I'm like, don't, but it sounds like I'm drunk. It's very slurred, and I mean, I can only theorize that it's because I'm sleeping and my mouth is open or drooling or whatever, or you know, I'm asleep, so I guess you're just kind of like don't, that kind of thing. And that's honestly what it sounds like. It just is very, it doesn't even sound like me, even though I know it's me. It's very interesting, and it's been a great window into my dreams and into why some mornings I wake up with a sore throat from screaming at shadow children, apparently, or telling people to put things down, or screaming don't at them, or I don't know, screaming about spiders or something like that. Oh, and my husband does not deny his snoring anymore. So thanks, Sleep Booster. I do want to say that I don't believe that there is a huge connection between horror movies and at least my night terrors. Of course, I believe that there's some connection. I don't think that they're completely innocent in the night terror realm. For me, but a lot of the time my dreams and nightmares are about things that I don't really fear, shadow children aside, like spiders, for instance. I don't want them crawling over me because it kind of feels violating and it's creepy, and I'm not afraid of them. I just don't want them crawling all over me. It's like I like salamanders, but I don't want them crawling all over me. Or you might not be afraid of a frog, but you don't want it hopping in your hand. It just feels weird, right? It just doesn't feel natural, and that's what it is. But yet, the nightmares I remember the most, and the ones that I think I am the most animated in this sleep recording, are mostly of spiders crawling everywhere, and those are also my most fitful sleeps. I had this one recording that I listened to where I went, spiders are quick, or something like that. It was ridiculous. Like, I don't even know. I mean, they are quick. It's true, right? But what was I dreaming about? And I think I mentioned this before in what I gave a fuck about, but when I'm having a night terror and it's shadow children, I take on this very authoritative mum-like voice, and that's what I'm telling the shadow children to stop it and put it down and don't, and that kind of thing, or anything like that. So that has been interesting because I find that I don't really have that authoritative mom-like voice in real life unless my husband hasn't done the dishes in a while or something like that. So it's just very interesting. I also have these lucid dreams, like I mentioned, but instead of making out with Captain America, have you guys ever had this where you lose all of your teeth in your dream and it genuinely feels like you have lost all of your teeth? I have these dreams constantly, and I've been having them for so long that I did look up what people think that might mean, and most of these quote-unquote dream dictionaries think that it means that you have a low view of yourself and your image, which is correct for me, but it's the feeling of my teeth falling out of my mouth that scares me because it feels so real, and I can still recall that feeling of having an empty mouth or pulling the teeth out of my mouth as I look in the mirror. Even though I have great teeth and they're all still in there, I take care of them. My dentist seems happy with me. So is this lucid feeling whilst I'm dreaming reminiscent of when I was a kid and lost my teeth then? And like, how am I actually feeling that while I'm sleeping? I've woken up terrified on several occasions that my teeth are gone, and then just as quickly, utterly relieved that it was just a dream because it feels so damn real. It could be too, like maybe it's just that I actually have a fear of my teeth falling out. And admittedly, I cannot watch horror movies where there's anything to do with teeth. It's just bleh, like I can't do it. Or if there's a scene with teeth, not so much people eating each other, but if there's a scene with teeth and people are pulling out teeth, I just have to skip it. Or I never watched the one with the woman with a toothed vagina, but although apparently it is really good. So who knows, maybe I'll get over my fear of teeth enough to watch it one day. So obviously this won't be our last conversation about the horror genre, and I hope that maybe my methods work for you if you're finding out that you're struggling with not just horror, but the horrors of life. And look up the article by Dr. Mark Griffiths again and just take a quick gander. It's really very, very interesting. And if you don't like horror, then that's okay too. You gotta do what works best for you. But for those of us like me who love horror but not the fear, these are the tried and true methods. One of us, one of us. So I want to end with a quote from another doctor, Dr. John Hess, about the origin of horror movies and our fears surrounding them. Quote, "Looking at the history of horror, you have mutant monsters rising in the 50s from our fear of the nuclear boogeyman, zombies in the 60s with Vietnam, Nightmare on Elm Street as a mistrust in authority figure stemming from the Watergate scandals, and zombies again in the 2000s as a reflection of viral pandemic fears." That's very succinct for right now. Continuing quote, "But for as many horror cycles that fit the theory, there are many that don't. And horror films work on a universal level, crossing national boundaries while still working in different cultures." Very succinct, very cool, something to ponder, something to think about, something to research, and something to talk about next time.
Thanks for tuning in today, geeks. Be sure to join us on Patreon at www.patreon.com/geeksoup. You can also check out our website at www.thegeeksoup.com or check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Geek Soup Pod. I'm also on YouTube, and stay tuned for Geek Soup Gaming only on Twitch.